Do you prefer to live in a world of fantasy where you're the main character, nothing bad can happen to you, you get in these amazing adventures, and you're friends with everybody, right? Or would you rather live in the real world, which is a lot harder? Not everybody's your friend. You probably don't have a lot of friends in the real world. Things are really difficult, and every day is more or less monotonous. And that's something that Deltarune attempts to ask everybody who plays it or watches it. And it's nowhere more obvious than Chapter 2, Cyber's World, which is what I wanted to talk about today. Chapter 2. And I realized while working on it and replaying the chapter and looking into stuff is that the only way I can really talk about Chapter 2 is backwards in a way. And that will begin to be more understandable as we get into the video. Anyways, this is the Chapter 2 video, and let's get into it. First, I'd like to talk about the actual dark world of Cyber's world, and then as we go, I'd like to touch on the other things. But first of all, I really want to talk about it. We know very clearly this is supposed to be the internet, or at least it's supposed to be a computer, the internet, and all kind of things in between, wires and all. That's how I view the actual first 30% of the dark world, this outskirt field. This field feels like we're walking around the wiring inside of the computer. It feels like we are walking through the connection between the internet and the computers in the lab at the library. I find that very interesting. It's the field of wires, the field of Wi-Fi, the field of copper and wiring. It's something like that. And I find it very interesting. I like this area mostly because it sets up the city very well. We can see the city in the distance, and it's this gigantic backdrop that seems to have no end with a beautiful skyline, beautiful colors, and it's just like inviting you to go there. It's inviting you, like, oh, you're about to enter the city, but first you gotta go through here. And this area is very similar to how every other Dark World more or less has like an introductory limbo area. However, this isn't really a limbo. It's actually here for a reason, and that main reason is something I want to talk about first. It's to set up the difference between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. In the field of wires here, in the outskirts, we find out that Susie and Rousey can act. We find this out through Susie because she forces Rousey and herself to act, whereas Rousey attempts to his biggest failures, as always, to restrict us from doing anything that is not on a set notion of rules that the prophecy tells us. Again, this is another reason I dislike Rousey. I don't like Rousey. I love Susie because she breaks the rules and makes the game a lot easier and a lot more fun, for that matter. In this area, like I said, it's mostly used to set up these new mechanics. So we also learn that now we have recruits, and whenever you spare an enemy, you get like a little pop-up that says, oh, 1 out of 5, 2 out of 5. It more or less gamifies battles, as well as us having a clear indicator of how much mercy and how much acting we need to do in order to get an enemy to be spared. This does a lot for battles because in Chapter 1, you were more or less able to spare enemies in 1 or 2 turns, but you didn't really know when you were very close or very far from sparing an enemy. For example, when you're fighting Jevil, the main way to beat him with mercy is to tire him out. The thing is, you don't really have a meter, you don't have anything that really tells you that. So while you can look online for guides that tell you, oh, you need to do 9 pirouettes and 10 hypnosises, or whatever that may be, I never actually bothered looking that up. While you could do that, you most likely are just gonna play and you're gonna try your hardest. You're more or less never gonna know if what you're doing is enough. While, of course, there is the special attack that usually happens around the end of a boss fight, Jevil can keep going even after that attack if you've not done quite enough to him to put him to sleep. And it can be confusing sometimes. That's why in Chapter 2, in the beginning, we're faced with a lot of battles before the act kind of gets started. Of course, we learn about Queen. We meet the newcomer to the Dark World, Noelle. I love Noelle. I love Noelle. She is my favorite little darling, and someone else, but we don't learn about them just now. But I think it's great. It shows us the differences between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, between the years of pause in which they were working on this chapter. There was a lot changed. Toby Fox has had help from other people to actually make it a better, more enjoyable game, and it shows. There's a lot of contrast between Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, but a lot of it is gameplay focused. It's how the game feels and how the game plays. It feels much more consistent, it feels much more focused. Whereas Chapter 1 was this beginning project, almost a proof of an idea. Chapter 2 has realized what idea it wants to make and is just going with it. It knows what it wants to be. It knows what it's going to be in the future. It has plans. It has everything laid out. And I'm not saying in Chapter 1 that Toby didn't have things laid out. Of course, he probably did. But when it comes to Chapter 2, it is miles above Chapter 1 in terms of scope, in terms of ambition, and in terms of design, and in terms of consistency and focus, and a ton of other things I could say. I love Chapter 1 because Chapter 1 is incredibly flawed, but I also love Chapter 2 because it shows what you can achieve. You may start out with not the greatest chapter, not the greatest thing in the world, and then eventually follow up with something that is better and better and better. And that is one way a lot of people can describe Deltarune. Each chapter of the game, while I'm not going to mention the following chapters yet, get better and better and better, increasingly more than the last one, of course. Another thing I'd like to talk about in this little cyber field before we actually get to the city part is just the characters here. I find it all very interesting. Of course, we're gonna see these characters later, but for now, one type of character we have is the plug sockets that I find really interesting. We're clearly not in the internet just yet. We're still in the computer lab. We're still in the computer. We're still in the wiring. So the enemies we fight are, of course, plug sockets. And of course, we fight a few tasks, which are these little cats, of course, called tasks, which we later find out about the task manager, who is an incredibly well-designed, awesome character that I love a lot, and I kind of wish she played a bit more of a role in Chapter 2. There's a lot of characters with really great designs in Chapter 2 just thrown in there, and I feel like a lot of the time they do not get the amount of time to really shine. However, that is, of course, somewhat solved by a new addition in this chapter, which I'd like to talk about later, which is the actual castle town. It actually serves to give characters more time to shine when they're not in their respective Dark Worlds, but I'll wait to actually talk about that. We also meet Cap and Case here, which is also how we learn that the entire party can act by themselves. I'll be honest, I don't find Cap and Cakes exciting as characters or interesting. I don't really know what role they're supposed to fill, especially in a chapter where you have Queen. We forgot to mention Queen, but I'd like to talk about her soon. Uh, an amazing anti-hero who turns out to really not be that evil compared to King from chapter 1. She's pretty great. She just has a very weird way of going about things and is clearly terminally online because she's a computer or a laptop, if I remember correctly. We have Spamton, who steals the show in this entire chapter. Unfortunately for every other character, Spamton steals the chapter, steals the spotlight. He is the big shot of Deltarune as a whole, you could say. I mean, we still talk about Spamton, and we are still obsessed with Spamton, even though it's been years. And I don't think Spamton will ever become unpopular. We have Task Manager, as I previously mentioned. We have the Squatch. We have a lot of characters. We have Noelle. We have Berdly. We have the Fun Gang themselves. And then we have these guys, these like little robots. And first of all, their design never really intrigued me personally. And their whole shtick as a whole just doesn't interest me. They're supposed to be rebel fighters against Queen's tyranny, I guess, and I just don't really see it. They never really do anything. I mean, they show up for the final fight of the chapter. That's great. And so does like everybody else you meet. That's not really special, in my opinion. We also meet Newbert, Dugout. Something very interesting about Newbert is Newbert is great. Everybody loves Newbert. We all love Newbert, and he's awesome. So I like to have him here in my castle town. Very easy to recruit him. You just gotta do one of those word puzzles. And I do want to say, like, these word puzzles are pretty fun additions. Of course, they don't really do much besides this introductory section. But something that does stay more or less during the chapter is the teacup segments, which I am always very bad at. Terrible. I hate the teacup segments. While replaying this chapter, I was having a really hard time for some reason. But somehow, when I was about to fight Spamton, I just did a first try. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just because I've fought Spamton so many times and I've had to do that so many times that at this point it's just kind of second nature. But yeah, the teacups are kind of nice. I don't really understand the meaning behind them. I mean, some things I can kind of see meaning behind, right? Like plug sockets or the keyboard, typing puzzles. But I don't really understand the teacups. I'm not really good when it comes to PC or laptop culture, so a lot of the things in this chapter may fly over my head. But from what I know, I would like to actually talk about it. Now that we're actually in the city, it's awesome. I love the city so much. I love Cyber's world. It's full of color, and it has some of the best moments, in my opinion, in the game. You don't actually spend a lot of this dark world with the Fun Gang, as Chris and Susie and Rousey are separated around the time you actually enter the city. And Chris, in order to eventually reunite with their friends, has to form 3 alliances. Well, first of all, it's Berdly, the newcomer to the Dark World, an incredibly awesome character that unfortunately is not very well liked by the community that much, for reasons I'd like to get into later. But just if you don't want to watch until then, I love Berdly and I have a lot to say about him. My little blue bird. Another character that Chris forms an alliance with is Queen, which everybody loves Queen. She's very funny, like I said. She's a very enigmatic villain. She's you don't know what she's gonna do because she's terminally online and very random, but we love Queen. We love her laugh. We love the way she acts. She's pretty awesome as a character. However, one thing to note about Queen that I'd like to get into in her own section of the video is that she's kind of a parental figure in this chapter. at least to Berdly and Noelle, which is a big theme of this game. It's like parents and children. Every character in the game either has parents or has been neglected by their parents. For example, Chris, I would go as far as to say, is pretty neglected by their parents. Just take a look at their room. There's blood on the floor. There's no trophies on their side of the room, and Toriel seems to not really care about what their kid gets up to. It's kind of sad. Susie, we have no idea if she has parents or if she's by herself, and I'm very scared about that. Very scared. It's not really nice. I really hope we will meet someone who takes care of Susie in the near future. Of course, Susie's parent could just be Gaster. Susie Gaster is a giant meme that has some reasoning behind it, I suppose, but it would be pretty funny if Gaster was just a stay-at-home dad who never really got up to anything, and all the theories we make about the voices at the start and the voice on the end screen being Gaster, being just not Gaster and a completely new character is oh well, Susie. But while I'm not going to have a dedicated section for Susie, Rossi, and Chris this whole chapter, I would like to talk about them here to get a little chance at explaining things and how I feel about them. Rousey and Susie go on their own little adventure that we don't really get to see a lot of, but they seem to be having fun. Rousey teaches Susie how to heal, and Susie teaches Rousey sarcasm. Rousey attempts to act more like a person, but I still see it as a performance. I do not believe Rousey is dumb enough, as he pretends to be, to not understand what sarcasm is. Whereas Susie learns to cast a healing spell, which will be relevant later on in this game, as Susie's not supposed to be able to heal. Susie once again breaks another rule of this whole prophecy, of this whole myth of the Delta Warriors. She's supposed to be the fighter, she's supposed to be the monster, but she doesn't play by the rules. She learns how to heal, and as a little bonus that I forgot to mention last time, she does not wear ribbons, or at least most of them. I believe there is one or two ribbons she can wear somewhat, maybe just one, but for the most part she will not wear ribbons. Which is something that every Delta Warrior more or less must do, with the air quotations, because must do is just Rousey being like, oh, we gotta follow the prophecy. We gotta follow. No, we're not following the prophecy, buddy. I love the fact that Susie is able to break the prophecy. However, breaking things is not the only time that this happens with Susie. Well, I kind of worded that wrong, but there's another term of breaking we can do in this chapter. While I do not want to talk about this very much, it's kind of important to mention, I suppose. There does exist a weird route in this chapter specifically. It is where it begins, where we attempt to break the entire game. We break the rules of what has been settled before us. Chris does not do this. We cause this as the player. As the soul. This is our bidding, and at every point in this weird route, Chris is against us and attempting to stop us. That's all I want to say about the weird route. I would mention it perhaps in the future a little bit more, but I have never played the weird route. I never intend on playing it, and I never really intend on watching a playthrough of somebody playing the weird route. I do not believe that the excuse for doing the weird route should be, oh, I paid £20 or £25 or how much ever you paid for this game, I should get most of the content out. I believe to a certain extent, you do this out of your own choice to do it. Obviously, this is not mandated by the game to do. This will most likely lead to a different ending in the game. It will lead to different outcomes. However, if you want those outcomes, good luck to you. I believe that the weird route is not something that we should be doing. I believe it is in there for something very terrible. And I hope people understand that. If people use the excuse of wanting to get their money's worth out of this game, well, you're welcome to do that. Me personally, I could not bring myself to do the weird route to these children. They matter a lot to me, and I don't think I'll ever do it, or I'd never like to actually watch somebody do it. I've seen very little bits, and this is as far as I like to talk about it, besides a few mentions in the future. Chris goes on their own adventure and meets Noelle, obviously, and it's mostly Chris and Noelle the entire chapter, which is great. We get like a break from the Fun Gang as a whole, and we are given a few more characters to interact with one on one, which I really like this chapter. We give time to these characters to shine, which is something I'd like to see more in the future. After chapter 1, the Fun Gang is mostly somewhat developed. Of course, development happens over time and more development will happen. But in chapter 2 specifically, most of the development happens at the end. And I really like the fact that instead of sticking the entire Fun Gang together and just, I don't know, going through the city, Chris has 3 people that they constantly interact with. Mostly Noelle, as Noelle follows Chris throughout the main portion of the city. Berdly, to a certain extent. Berdly mostly fights Chris and us by extension, and is mostly there to kind of be like... A lot of people look at Berdly as a little bit of a roadblock, if that makes sense. Someone who breaks this fantasy, this escapism. Berdly has a lot of things to be said about, but I do not believe that what Berdly does in this chapter, constantly being antagonistic against Chris, is necessarily mean-spirited or evil. I believe, in my opinion, and I'd like to talk about this more when I get there, Noelle and Berdly believe this is all a part that they have to play. Not in the way that they know what's going on, but they just assume this is some kind of play going on. I do not believe they completely understand the Dark World and what they mean, because they did not have Ralsei and the entirety of the Chapter 1 adventure to get them into it. They begin the Dark World alone and have to find out something to do. We do not know how long Noelle and Berdly have been in the Dark World before we arrive there as the Soul and as the Fun Gang, because we're not really sure how much time passes. Also, something to be considered is, in the beginning of the chapter, we first make a stop in Castletown, and we probably stick around there for a little while before actually heading to the library. We don't know how long they've been in the Dark World, but by the looks of it, it was enough time for at least Berdly to get acquainted with Queen. And Queen as well is... She shows up some more or less throughout moments and is pretty interesting. Of course, throughout the entire chapter, Queen is mostly connected to Berdly and Noelle. Noelle doesn't want to be found by Queen, and Noelle is Noelle is a very big stranger to what goes on in this chapter. She doesn't really seem to understand things right away and kind of just plays along, and that's something very interesting I'd like to talk about when I get to Noelle. But more or less, now that we've kind of talked about Noelle, Berdly, and Queen as a little introduction, the rest of the chapter is kind of simple. It is very exciting and fun, but it has a very simple premise. The main premise is to reunite with the Fun Gang, and then it's to actually seal the fountain, as it's always the premise. And the main thing that stops the Fun Gang from sealing the fountain constantly Noelle and Berdly constantly get kidnapped and are used to fight the Fun Gang and to slow them down and stuff like that. I kind of like this because, well, you're not gonna hate Noelle and Berdly for constantly getting kidnapped by a queen and her henchmen because they've never been in the Dark World before. Whereas Susie, Rosie, and Chris are already equipped to go through here. We eventually reach the actual mansion of Queen, and it's a very interesting place, more or less a labyrinth. We also find the secret boss here. Well, there's a few steps to actually do Spamton, which is something I kind of forgot to mention in this whole Dark World section, is that Spamton is probably the easiest secret boss to actually do in this game, is because he clearly tells you what you need to do in order to find him. I find that very interesting. It's probably because Toby worked a lot on Spamton, and Spamton has such important things to say about this game, about Chris, and about how the world works in this game, that Toby really wanted him to be found. It's more or less a side quest to find Spamton and fight him. Whereas fighting Jevil was, as I mentioned, a little bit difficult because some people may have missed the fact that you could walk back into the elevator and simply go to the floor where Jevil is. Fighting the keys was easy enough, but knowing to go back into the elevator may have been a little difficult. And there's a lot of these little contrasts, little differences between chapter 1 and chapter 2, where it's very clear, oh, I want to put more effort and highlight this secret boss more. The amount of stuff Spamton has to him, while I do, of course, want to talk about Spamton in his own way, Spamton has so much effort and so much presentation put into him, whereas Jevil was a little room at the bottom of the castle. Fair enough, it's very thematic. He is the jester who's been imprisoned. But we don't really hear about Jevil throughout the chapter, whereas Spamton is constantly foreshadowed. He is foreshadowed by the clapping cakes, as they talk about how a little man wanted to make them a suit. He is foreshadowed by the trash pile, as we find a very ominous door halfway through the chapter, and we want to find out what's there. He meets us. He very clearly has a whole introduction with us where we have to choose to go out of our way to make a deal with him to see what he's all about. He has an entire shop, and characters sometimes will speak about him in a very secretive manner, as if they're trying to avoid something. You can ask the Squatch who owns the cafe in Queen's Mansion about the basement, and he'll just try to avoid you. Other Addisons, the little salespeople, sometimes they speak about him. Especially very interesting is after you beat Spamton, you can actually go back to the trash zone and you'll have a lot of dialogue that I'd like to go into later. But that's also very interesting. As a whole, Chapter 2 is pretty great. And I think Chapter 2 has a much more focused presence because of what it tries to be. It's a chapter about the internet and PC and internet culture as a whole. While we know from this that Deltarune isn't set in the current day, at least, of course, this would be very hard to do as chapters are released with like 5 years apart from each other. However, I believe that this whole vision of the internet is actually Toby Fox again. We talked last time how chapter 1 is a vision of youth, of how a kid would imagine their little fun adventures of pretending. I believe chapter 2 is Toby Fox trying to talk to us about how the internet was when he was younger, when he was our age, and he was going to forums and all kinds of places to talk about his favorite games. It's not our internet, at least not mine. I'm 21. I was not really born around the time for this internet or the early internet. By the time I actually got on the internet, I think the old era of it, the 2000s era of the internet, was dying out, unfortunately. And I never got to experience that. My main experiences of the internet when I was younger was mostly YouTube and Five Nights at Freddy's content, because I was a fiend for that, and Minecraft animations as well, and Flash game websites. That was great. In this chapter, most of the internet characters are just pop-ups, ad blockers, email characters. It's all very simple. It's like back in the day when not every website was this clean looking place where everything was just really a way to spend your time. Nowadays, the internet is more or less seen as a way to make money. It's a way to make a business. It's a way to advertise, and it's always been a way to advertise and more or less make a business. But I think Toby Fox just wants to show me and other people who are younger how the internet was back in his day. It's a look at nostalgia, somewhat, but it's also a look at escapism through the internet. I remember when I was a kid and I had a pretty bad time at home, I just spent my time watching YouTube videos. And I still do that. I still just watch YouTube videos and spend time on the internet just to be able to escape a little bit. And we see that from our characters. In Queen's Mansion, we have the individual rooms of every character. We have Susie, Chris, Berdly, Noelle, and a few other characters that I don't really have a need to mention. Chris and Susie are the main ones I actually want to talk about, because in her room, Susie has search histories of little video games with skateboards that she used to play, and Chris has piano tutorials. That's very simple, isn't it? I mean, all Susie wants to do is play a few games on her computer, whereas Chris wants to learn how to play piano or maybe just play a specific song. That's so simple. It's just so to the point, I believe. It's just kind of, it's the internet in its most simple form. It's just a place to look for things. And I think we've kind of lost that, and I don't think I'll ever get to experience it. People always talk about how great the internet was back in the day. I don't think I ever really got to experience that internet to a certain extent, and I like to think that a lot of people who say that about the internet probably didn't get to experience it either. A lot of people who say that are probably not much older than me and didn't really get to experience that lawless internet. And in this chapter, I wouldn't even say it's lawless. Comparing it to a grand city like this, it means one thing: you can find everything. During the battle with Queen at the end of the chapter, the city expands onwards forever. The internet is never ending. The city itself doesn't seem to have an end to it, even if we walk around. There's constantly cars, there's traffic, which of course can be attributed to simply just internet traffic and people trying to use websites. And at certain points, the roads are blocked. That's pretty easy emphasis on the fact that back in the day, connections and stuff like that, actually getting on the internet, getting on websites where the server limit was a lot smaller than it is nowadays, was a lot harder. It was, not a place for millions of people to use. It was, a few hundreds, maybe thousands, but nowadays, compared to that, there's almost no limits. I mean, websites will still crash, websites will still stop working when there's a lot of traffic. That's something that kind of has stayed the same about Chapter 2's internet, and maybe how Toby Fox has experienced it in the past. I really like that. I, too, was very similar to Susie and Chris, where all I really did on my computer back in the day was look up Flash games online, which is why I find Susie so endearing and I love her so much, because she is so unapologetically herself. She's just a kid, she's a teenager, and she's like a lot of us. I feel like a lot of people who are younger there's much people younger than me who play these games, but I remember a time when I didn't have video games, I didn't have a proper game console, and all I had was a very barely working computer, family computer, where I tried to play games, and I just, it makes me really feel for Susie. I love her a lot. She's my little kid, and she means a lot to me. This chapter, I'm not really going to talk about her that in that much detail, since not that much happens, but there is some stuff to be mentioned about Susie. As a whole, chapter 2 is great. The world is great. I'll probably mention more stuff as we actually go through the chapter, and it actually makes more sense to bring it up. But as a whole, I believe chapter 2 attempts to be a nostalgic look or an escapist look into the internet, into spending time on your phone, maybe on your laptop, on your computer even. Whereas chapter 1 was escapism through imagination and fantasy, chapter 2 is escapism through a world of infinite possibilities where you can be anyone and do anything. That's chapter 2's world, in my opinion, and that's why I like it so much. It's very focused and it knows what it wants to be. Now that we finished talking about the Dark World to a certain extent, I'd like to talk about the Queen. She's loved by most of the fan base, and it's very easy to see why. She's kind of random, but incredibly cool. She's like a lot of people who use the internet, I'd say. She's funny, cool, but random, most of all, and she puts on a pretty cool character. Queen is, by all means, supposed to be a mother figure to Berdly and Noelle this chapter. To a certain extent, she is a mother figure to the Fun Gang as well, but it is not seen anywhere else more than Berdly and Noelle. Queen is incredibly focused on finding Noelle and creating a dark world that she is happy in, because Queen knows who Noelle is. Queen has seen what Noelle has on her search history. Queen has seen the struggles of Noelle's life, and she just wants to make it easier for her. The Queen wants Noelle and the other Lightners, the Fun Gang and Berdly, to help her create more dark fountains, to create a larger, more impactful dark world in which they can all live together and go on these incredibly fun adventures and not have to think about the real world. But we see that even in this dark world, the characters are still faced with their real life problems, always looming in the back of their head. Queen's plan could never really work. As much as she means to help the Lightners, to help the kids, her plan is simply flawed. A lot of the characters have no idea what they would cause if they were to create more dark fountains, which is also something that really bothers me in the ending of the chapter where they're about to create more dark fountains and Rousey talks to them as if everybody here knew what would happen if more dark worlds are created. I don't like Rousey. I don't like the way he acts sometimes. I find it, I probably don't want to talk about Rousey in this chapter because he pisses me off a little bit more than he does in chapter 1. But regardless, Queen realizes what she would be doing is incredibly harmful to everybody and she stops. Her whole thing this chapter is wanting to make a good place for Noelle. I do not believe that she ever meant to roboticize her face. That was just an empty threat to scare off the Fun Gang, who was a danger in her eyes. By the end, she realized that none of them are really that bad. As a matter of fact, she rarely acts as a villain throughout this entire chapter. Yes, towards the end, she does some stuff, but the extent of her action is simply imprisoning the Fun Gang and fighting them in a large mech suit, and eventually just kind of holding them in her hand. It never really seems like Queen ever wishes ill against the Fun Gang, Berdly, or Noelle. Quite the opposite. She just is trying to achieve her purpose to make a good world for Noelle, but it seems the Fun Gang just keeps getting in her way and she doesn't understand why. So I think to her it just seems, oh, they don't want Noelle to be happy. They don't want her to feel good. I mean, even look at Noelle's room in Queen's mansion. It's incredibly pretty. It has a statue of Susie. Queen knows that Noelle likes Susie. Queen knows these things, and it has given her a room, a very calming room with all the things that matter to her. The obvious calendar that has December the 25th circled on every page. God, Queen knows everything about Noelle. And she knows everything about everybody else. And that's why I think the parent in her, she is directly supposed to be a contrast to a real life parent. She is incredibly obsessed with Noelle and wishes to make everything better for her, while Berdly, through all of his attempts to please and make Queen happy, she doesn't really care about him, even forgetting how his name is spelled. That's incredibly sad in my opinion. And I'd like to talk about these things more when I actually get to Berdly, but he scratches and claws for any ability to make Queen see him. I would wager the role he puts on in the Dark World is to be seen by the Funny Gang as well, to be seen by anybody. However, through all of his efforts and all of his grand gestures and all of his personas and acts that he puts on, he is never really seen as much as Noelle is. And Queen represents a very specific type of parent who has a favorite child. Queen doesn't really care that much for the Fun Gang either. I mean, Chris and hers interactions are more or less just kind of work relations. I mean, there are points where Queen is like, "Oh, Chris, let's play a game and have some fun," and Berdly crashes the party, and you know, in my opinion, Queen is probably what a lot of people went through when they were younger. We all probably had a parent like Queen, or maybe a lot of people did, who favor one of your siblings or someone else over you, and no matter what you do, you are not really of interest. Maybe you did something very special that day. Maybe you created something. Maybe you drew something. Maybe you played a video game and you just wanted to show your mom or your parents, and they clearly don't really care. I think that's kind of a little bit of the parent that Queen is supposed to represent because of how much of a team parents really are in this game. She is Queen, she is the mother, and her only interest is Noelle, more or less. To a certain extent, you can contrast Queen and Toriel, and, well, there are some similarities. While we don't know how Toriel acts when Azrael was around, we can see how Toriel acts when Chris is here. And we see more of how she acts as the chapters continue. But I don't think I'm in the state to be able to actually talk about Toriel in the later chapters just yet. But it's very clear to see that, to a certain extent, Chris is forgotten about. Besides the fact that Chris is a human in a family full of goats, that's indication enough to show they're probably an outsider in their own family. Asgore, by a little bit of a contrast, actually seems to care a lot about Chris, but is simply unable to be there for them. Asgore seems to have his own stuff going on and seems to have been kicked out of the house, and a lot of people in town don't really talk about him. anymore. He seems like he's become the black sheep, or rather the black goat of hometown. But regardless of everything, Asgore deeply cares about Chris, as it's clearly shown, which is a contrast to Toriel, which is also a contrast to Queen. If we look at King from chapter 1, King did care for Lancer to a certain extent, again. Uh, Perhaps not to show too much humility, not to embarrass himself, and not to show weakness. In chapter 1, Chaos King is not really emotional towards his own son. However, as we continue to meet Chaos King in the following chapters in Castletown, he seems incredibly remorseful that he disappointed his son and tries to do everything to hang out with him more. Speaking about Lancer, and to a certain extent Rule's Card, they are also in this chapter. However, one thing to note is that they're not in the Dark World itself. They are not from Queen's world. And there is a very interesting thing here. Rolls appears to start working for Queen at a certain point. He just leaves our inventory and goes to work for Queen. But the same fate befalls him and Lancer as they turn to stone, since they're not able to exist outside of their own dark worlds. I find that very interesting, and I also like the idea that Roll's Card just always has to find some boss or whoever leads the Dark World to actually become subservient to, which obviously shows that Queen is the leader of this Dark World. She's the queen of the Cyber City. She's the queen of the internet. And as much as Queen is a very fun character, as much as Queen is a very interesting character, I think it's important to understand what Queen represents. Queen represents a neglectful parent towards their children. Even if not directly, we know that Queen is not the parents of Noelle and Berdly. Even if it's not direct, it is a very clear representation of that. And that's what makes Queen even more important. She is always drinking wine or battery acid for a fact. I mean, it's very clear imagery of a parent who doesn't really care much about their child. And I do talk about this a lot now, but I think that's very important. Because this video, this channel, is about me talking about stuff that matters to me in games. And I could talk a lot about other stuff in chapter 2, but I think this is really important. This whole thing that the game shows, especially in chapter 2, it is so important in chapter 2. Especially because later on, Susie comes over to Chris's house, and Susie has time enjoying baking with Toriel, while Chris is in the bathroom and seems to be gone for a considerable amount of time, somewhat frightening. Toriel doesn't seem to notice when Chris is gone for a pretty good amount of time, and he's just, I think the game does show a level of struggle to be a kid, and I think that's why a lot of people like it. It is because in Queen, we see that representation first and foremost in this chapter. It is the most important thing this chapter, in my opinion. Besides the themes, there are the themes of freedom, there are the themes of escapism, there are the themes of the internet, but most of all, it is the relationship a parent has with their child. And that is the core of Deltarune, in my opinion. Besides escapism, besides breaking free, I think it is very important to keep in mind this relationship with parents and children keeps going on in this game, and it is so important that we remember it, because it will be coming back later. It will haunt us for the rest of the game, and it will not get any better than it does this chapter. So Queen, we love Queen, but I think she means so much more than just a funny, enigmatic character. She means, well, she is something that these characters should have, which is a caring parent. If only she treated the rest of the fun gang like she does to Noelle, perhaps they would all be a little bit happier. Anyways, that's the section on Queen. so I think we should move on a little bit. In my opinion, there isn't a more important Shadow Crystal boss than Spamton, and it's exactly why he is so easy to find. He is in your way, and he makes it very clear that you should follow him and follow his advice and quest if you want to fight him. The first time you meet Spamton, you can just go out of your way to not even do his Shadow Crystal boss fight. You can just not make a deal with him. You don't have to. You can completely just not do it. You can go out of your way and not follow his advice. However, it is clearly outlined before you. The game and Toby Fox, like I said, clearly wanted you to meet Spamton. Because unlike Jevil, Spamton has a lot more significance in Chapter 2 and the chapters to come. In my opinion, it is a bit unfortunate that Jevil was in Chapter 1 because the whole idea of a jester who knows he is inside of a game and he is trapped is very interesting. That is incredibly interesting, the amount of self-awareness that Jevil has. However, because he was in Chapter 1, obviously there was so much to introduce in Chapter 1 that to add so much weight with a character the same way Spamton does was not going to happen until a little later on. Now that we're in Chapter 2 and we've got the introductions out of the way and we somewhat know a thing or two about the dark worlds we're exploring and what's going to happen if we don't succeed in our missions, now it's actually time to get a little bit deeper into what everything means. The way I see Spamton is very clearly a mirror to Chris. They are both puppets. That's the very easy way to say it. Spamton's design is clearly that of a hand puppet, one that is used by comedians or stage performers or anything like that, especially his mouth design. When you are in a shop, I mean, it's very obvious. When you fight Spamton, he is propped up by these strings, these puppeteer strings that seem to come out of nowhere. They simply descend from the sky. I did want to make one little addition that I find incredibly interesting. The same color of green is shared by Spamton's strings, the combat box edges, as well as the original chapter select screen when you first boot up the game. It's all green. I believe to a certain extent green is an important color, however it is not directly related to the green soul as we see later on in the game. I believe that this specific green has to be used a certain way, the same way that it's used as a box to trap the soul. I believe that means something. A lot of shadow bosses and a lot of bosses in general actually are able to mess with our combat box, which I believe shows that those enemies that we fight have a stronger power besides whatever is keeping us hostage. For example, Jevil is able for his special attack to change the combat box. We're able to roam freely across the screen. This is not the only time this happens, and it will happen again later on. I believe that's incredibly important to keep in mind. Characters that can mess with the combat box, but also with combat in general, are very interesting in my opinion, because it clearly displays a power beyond something that we can actually go against. I mean, As a little example, in this chapter, Rules card completely changes how combat works. He has a whole minigame in which we have to select houses. No combat actually happens. Well, we do have to dodge attacks, but we don't actually attack Rules card. We have to move those boxes. And as the game continues, and as we see more of Rules card, and a few other characters, we will see more of these combat breaking enigmas, I think is the best way to call it. These moments where it's not a normal battle encounter. I think it shows that the characters that can do this have some other sort of power. Maybe not directly physical, and perhaps they would be easy to destroy or to defeat with the Fun Gang. However, they themselves are able to manipulate the world in a way. They're able to manipulate what we, as the player, sees, which could mean that they're self aware. And speaking about self awareness, back to Spamton, I do believe that he is to a certain extent self aware. However, he is so driven by his madness that he more or less lost the plot. Jevil appears to be driven mad, but I do believe Jevil in chapter 1 is completely aware of his situation. But because he's been locked up for so long, he's kind of given up trying anything. Whereas Spamton in chapter 2 lost everything and has gone crazy trying to get back to where he was. There is one important piece of dialogue that doesn't actually come from Spamton, but comes from his song. Think it's coming for me, answer the phone. I can't explain until you're all alone. It pulls the strings and makes them ring until your hearts get ripped up. Think it's coming for me, answer the phone. I can't explain until you're all alone. This is very interesting, and I love Big Shot as a song, but I will not be talking about it today, unfortunately. That much. Like the same way I talked about the Field of Hopes and Dreams. I think it's very important. The whole thing about the phone is very important to Spamton because we know from the Addisons that we meet in the trash pile zone that the way Spamton became big originally is he happened to make the right phone call, or somebody found him. Somebody made that phone call to Spamton as opposed to the other way around. We don't know who that person on the other side of the phone is, but there is something very interesting. When you go to Spamton's shop while it's open, the phone constantly rings. However, he does not pick up. I believe whoever this person is continues to contact Spamton, however, Spamton is scared. Or there is another thing you could see this as. When they describe what happened to Spamton, it said that the day that Spamton would be evicted from Queen's Mansion, he was not found in his room and there was just a phone left out. And when they picked up the receiver, there was nothing but garbage noise. The same exact thing that says when you try and use your phone in the dark world, Chris's phone. I believe that to a certain extent, Spamton is scared to pick up the phone ever again because he doesn't want to hear what's on the other side. He might be scared to have a similar experience. Another thing is if Spamton was able to call people, this person, and it was fine until that day, there's a few things to kind of think about, and I think the phone's very interesting. One thing is, what if everybody else hears garbage noise, but Spamton was able to actually hear somebody talk to him? What if this person talks? However, Chris, when we pick up the phone, Chris is not able to understand them. And for some reason, Spamton was able to. Perhaps the person on the other side of the phone wanted to be understood by Spamton, however, they do not want to be understood by Chris or anyone else. I do believe this makes sense to a certain extent because I mean, Chris hears garbage noise. The Addison who picked up the phone hears garbage noise, and I would say most other people do. Another thing you could say is that everything was fine until Spamton did something wrong, something happened, and whoever on the other side of the phone decided to turn against them, at which point Spamton couldn't hear them anymore. Spamton couldn't hear anything anymore on the phone. It was nothing but garbage noise. So I believe it is either the fact that you have to be picked to be able to understand whatever the person on the phone is saying, or Spamton simply fell out of grace, at which point he began to hear what everybody else was hearing, which is garbage noise, which is more or less kind of the same thing. But also, perhaps Spamton can still understand that person. It's just that nobody else can. It's kind of scary, in my opinion. Spamton also mentions this Mike person, which has sort of become a bit of a joke in the community, unfortunately, and is actually relevant to a certain extent, but I do not exactly believe that Mike was ever a person. I do not believe that Mike was ever going to be a character. I believe that Mike simply just represents somebody. It's like show business. These are salesmen. This is a salesman. Spamton is a salesman. He is a very extravagant person, all about show business, right? Of course, he would have some kind of a vocalist him, some kind of persona in his head that helped them work. You see a lot of these popular people that have personas, that have, an act put on. They usually have some kind of thing, the same way Spamton has Mike. Mike doesn't have to be a person. Mike is just something he can throw around in a conversation and be like, once Mike gets done with that job I gave him, I'm gonna finally be able to finalize this thing. It could just be a matter of him speaking. It could just be a way he talks. Mike doesn't have to be a person, and I don't believe Mike was ever meant to be a person. However, I could be very wrong here, but I've never been that focused on Mike. I believe Mike is just kind of a name. Mike is also an extremely basic name. Mike, maybe not basic, but a lot of people are named Mike. And I believe that's just there the same way he would say John. But John would be too obvious to just be an everyman name he can just throw around in his conversations. I simply believe that Mike doesn't hold that much weight to anything. However, as we continue the chapters, there will be more conversations about Mike. Something is going on with Mike, but I really don't think any theories can really be made about Mike at this point. I do not believe Mike is the person on the phone, since Spamton appears very secretive about who he's talking to on the phone. And if it really was Mike, I do not believe he would say the name so clearly. As I've said before, I see Spamton as a mirror to Chris. They're both puppets. Chris is simply puppeted by us, whereas Spamton is puppeted by something greater. I believe to a certain extent Spamton is puppeted by the Dark World itself, or whatever governs the Dark World, since his chains extend into the sky and we have no idea where they come from. You can fight Spamton in either of the two locations. You can fight him in the basement, in which case you begin to ride on the train tracks across the city landscape, and you can also fight him in the final room where the Dark World fountain is. I believe that's pretty interesting, because in both places we never get an explanation for where his strings come from, and in both areas his strings would just have to come from the sky, but there's never any mention about who controls Spamton, because in my opinion it does not matter who controls Spamton, just the same way it doesn't matter that we control Chris. That events always play out the same no matter who controls Chris. It doesn't matter who controls Chris. It doesn't matter who controls Spamton. The key thing here is that they're both puppets. They are not able to escape. And it makes me incredibly worried and sad when we see the reaction Chris has to Spamton failing to break free. It seems that, in my opinion, Chris really wanted to help Spamton break free. Regardless of Spamton's intentions, Chris can relate to being captured like this, to be held, and to not be allowed freedom. When Spamton fails, I believe Chris has a mental breakdown, but obviously we're not able to see that. The most we get is that when Chris says no, they scream it out loud. The only thing here is that Chris doesn't say anything. It's our voice that comes out of Chris. And all Chris can do is emphasize the no. I do believe that to a certain extent, these choices will help with certain things. Saying no because clearly Chris is not alright, or refusing to hug Ralsei, or being nice to Susie. I believe that certain choices will have a certain impact. While not clear, I do believe our relationship with Chris as the soul could get better over time. And I think it's very important that at least we are good friends with this kid. At least that they don't hate us. Because I would not want to be hated by the thing controlling me. And as much as I hate to have to control Chris's actions, I just want to help the fun gang. I hope Chris can forgive us for doing this to them someday. Perhaps in chapter 7 we get a little moment between us and Chris where we get to apologize for all the times that we may have made them do something they didn't want to. The only thing that I don't want towards the end of the game is for the same thing that happened to Spamton to happen to Chris. When Spamton lost his strings, he fell. And, well, I wouldn't say he died, but, well, there's not really an understanding to me of what actually happens when we defeat Jevil or Spamton with Mercy. I don't actually understand what happens, but we do see Spamton later on, which I believe means he didn't die or anything. He just has to stick with Chris or something like that. The basic thing we can infer is he just failed, which makes me worry a lot about Chris, because I do not want there to be a moment where we have to leave the Deltarune world, and that would mean that Chris can no longer go on without us. I really hope that there will be something in the future, something where Chris has to find their soul, their own soul. I hope that's how the game ends, with Chris regaining their lost soul. As a matter of fact, I don't talk about this a lot, but one of my theories is that Chris's soul is actually in Castletown. That door in the middle of going upstairs or downstairs, that one double door, that's where Chris's soul is. That's what keeps, I believe that is what keeps the fountain in Castletown alive. It is Chris's soul. Chris's real human soul gives Castletown power and life. And there's not a lot of evidence for it. I don't have a lot of evidence. And that's kind of why I don't like theorizing too much. I like to analyze things, and I like to look at things from my point of view and how they make me feel. However, theorizing can only go to a certain extent. I believe when you have evidence for a theory, it makes sense, but making a theory from nothing is, well, is just hoping at that point. My theory is that Chris's soul is behind the door in Castletown. There is no evidence, really. However, I like to believe that. Whereas saying that Gaster is possibly the voice at the start and the voice that talks to us whenever we fail in the game, that could genuinely be Gaster. From the speech patterns and the music used, you would assume it's Gaster. I guess what I'm saying is that I try not to theorize too much in these videos. While it's fun to theorize, when you don't really have evidence, it's kind of just giving your own headcanon of what you think might happen, which that's what theories are to a certain extent. Some theories attempt to predict what will happen, and that's great. However, I think it's important that we don't get lost too much into theories, that we mix up the actual canon and theory canon. That can be very difficult to do when you've not had that much content in almost a decade of this game coming out. At the end of the day, I do just want to say that Spamton is important for the game, and I will mention him throughout this video a little bit more, but I think it was important to introduce him. He's a very interesting character, he's a very fun character, and he has an amazing design in his Neo form. I have seen countless works of art, countless fan arts, countless just sprite work of Neo Spamton, and he looks amazing. Not to mention his song Big Shot that plays during his boss fight is probably one of the most remixed songs in this game. Besides, obviously, Megalovania, but that's Undertale, and I try to separate them as much as I can. Spamton's great, and the internet loved them, and they will continue to love him, and that's why I said that he will probably remain most likely the most loved shadow boss in the game. As a matter of fact, I believe that he's very close to being the most favorite boss in the game, because he's still being drawn to this day. Thousands and thousands of pieces of fan art. People always bringing him up. He is so relevant to the actual themes of Deltarune, and he is so connected to Chris. I would not be surprised if, in some way, shape, or form, he is actually relevant to the end of the game. That is something I did want to say. I do believe that all the Shadow Crystal bosses, if you defeat them in the friendly way, if you mercy spare them, I do believe that will play a role in the deeper parts of Deltarune. I believe towards the end they will be relevant once more, at least one last time, at least in one chapter. I do believe Toby could pull it off. While of course you may have missed some of the secret bosses, while of course you may have missed all of them, I think for one chapter at least it is fair to believe they may show up again. However, Spamton without a doubt will continue to show up more into the game. We can already know that he shows up more. However, I will not talk about that too much since I do want to focus on chapter 2. However, we will cross that bridge when we get there. At the end of the day, Spamton is just Chris if the roles were somewhat reversed, and if anything, Spamton just makes me worry about Chris a lot more, and just hope that they'll get to where they want to be eventually. I do not want the same to happen to Chris as what happened to Spamton. And I would like to say that I would do anything in my power to prevent something bad from happening to Chris. However, there seems to be only one alternative path in Deltarune, and at that point, I do not believe it is worth to cause everything in the weird route. I do hope that Chris will survive and they'll get to live a happy life. But as for Spamton, his plan failed, unfortunately. However, regardless of what may have happened to him, he did leave a lasting impression into everybody. While he himself may just be back to his normal little self, everybody will remember the big shot. Probably for the rest of Deltarune's development, for the rest of however long this game will live on, Spamton will be associated with it. I would wager that a lot of people who've not even played Deltarune know who Spamton is. I mean, I have friends who've not played Deltarune or are just getting into Deltarune who know who Spamton is. They've seen Spamton before. He is incredibly popular, and that's good to see. Anyways, I think I should move on. Spamton's great, and fun, and interesting. However, there is more to talk about that will bring Spamton up regardless. So, let's try and keep up. Now that we took the time to talk about two of the most important characters in this chapter, one of them probably one of the most important characters in the game as a whole, I can actually talk a lot about other aspects of chapter 2, since it was very important to get these foundations out of the way, Queen, Spamton, and the Dark World itself, because they'll come up a lot, because they're very relevant. However, right now I'd like to talk about something I missed in chapter 1. Or, well, I did mention I was going to talk about it in the chapter 2 video. Castletown. In chapter 1, there's very little to say about Castletown as a whole because it's really just a little area that you enter in, meet Rousey, and then you start your adventure. In chapter 2, after Susie and Chris go about their lesson in school, they go back to the locker. After Rousey asks us to get the chess pieces, the cards, all of the toys in the other classroom, and the Castletown transforms. This is something that will keep happening in like every chapter as Castletown expands and it becomes bigger and bigger with more characters, more activities to do. Right now in chapter 2, there's not quite a lot to do. You do have the battle dojo, which is great. I do hope that one day in chapter 7, we will have all of the activities unlocked. So let's say in chapter 4, for example, there are a ton of mini games you can unlock. I hope that if you unlock those mini games in chapter 4, they will remain open to use in chapter 5, 6, and 7, because me personally, I really like spending time in Castletown and I'd really like more things to do. One of the most requested things is a boss gauntlet of some sort in the dojo. It would be really awesome if we could practice some of the shadow bosses or just the bosses in general. In chapter 3, we gain a lot of minigames we can do, and some of them involve replaying old minigames from previous chapters, which is great. I'm not going to talk about that yet, but this is an example that we are kind of moving in the right direction. However, I would like to see more. I believe that just letting us fight the Shadow Crystal bosses is not that difficult of a thing to achieve. And I think it would save you a lot of time if you could just load up chapter 4 or chapter 5, 6, or even 7 and just go do any boss you want. I understand that you're going to be higher level since each chapter you go up by 1 level. If you don't fight anybody, if you fight people, then you level up normally. However, if you don't fight anybody, you go up by 1 level, but I'm pretty sure that would be very easily fixable. Just put us at the level we were when we first fought the boss. I think it would be just really nice. Something I want from Castletown is to just have it available in the last chapter of the game and just go back and hang out with the characters as much as I want after I finish the game, or I can have a save file before the end of the game, since to a certain extent I do believe that once the game ends, we may or may not be kicked out as the soul, since the prophecy does state that the Heroes of Light will banish the angels' heaven. So to a certain extent, there is kind of an idea in my head that, oh, once the game ends, it's over. It's unlike Undertale where you can just walk around as much as you want. That would be really nice if in the final chapter we finish the story, we beat the final boss, and we're just able to hang out with the kids as normal, and with the light nurse, and everybody's fine, everybody's alive, happy ending. I would really like a happy ending. I really want a happy ending where everybody's in Castletown and can hang out together. I would want nothing more than to just be able to hang out in Castletown for hours and hours on end. It really would just it's what I mostly do in the later chapters when there's more activities, is I just sit there and hang out. Sometimes I replay the game, of course. I'm replaying the game for these videos, and every few weeks I'll probably just do a run through just so I don't get too rusty when fighting the Shadow Crystal bosses, but Yeah, I really just appreciate for Castletown to actually be a town to hang out with. Right now in chapter 2, most you can do, like I said, is the dojo with a few very tutorial-esque fights. It makes sense, sure, but I don't know. This is just in chapter 2. Do we really need this in chapter 2? I'd appreciate like proper replayable fights or something like that, but whatever. We're still working on it. Toby Fox still working on it, so we'll see what he comes up with, but I just hope it's stuff that's replayable. Something really cool in Castletown is you also have the bakery, and it allows you to modify items. It allows you to create new items from recipes and stuff like that. I think it's cool. It's one of the biggest theory evidences out there. Some items you can craft here kind of go into a few theories that I wouldn't like to go into a lot, but there is one specific item that screams acknowledgement, and it's the twisted sword. We don't know what it will do. It's pretty great. I don't know, me personally, I'm not too interested in combining items. I think it's a nice little feature, but there's not a lot to it, as most of the items in this game are either healing items, so you either make a really powerful heal item or you make a stronger armor or weapon by combining two. There's some grounds for theories relating to certain items you can craft, but me personally, I'm not interested in that theory or whatever that may lead to, so I'd rather not talk about it. I kind of like it, it's whatever. What I really like in chapter 2, well, in Castletown, is the cafe. The cafe gets bigger and bigger with every chapter, and it's amazing. You eventually are able to like swap places for each character in the cafe and have them talk to each other and have different interactions. It's great. This is what I'm talking about. This is good. This is I want to like just have my game open, hanging out in here while I'm working or doing something. This is nice. This is very sweet. This is very like harmless, but it's amazing. I want more of this stuff from Castletown, being able to actually interact with Castletown, not just clicking on somebody and getting a text message. Besides that, there's not that much to do in Castletown, but there is very heartwarming interactions with most of the residents. Something very important, there's this one guy who says the town's name, and it's whatever you picked at the start. That's a little bit weird. I was not going to go into theory land here right now, but holy, this is a lot. Someone or somehow these lighteners know your name, not Chris's, and this could be the reason a lot of characters seem to somewhat ignore Chris. They also ignore Rousey. Queen ignores Rousey. It's almost like Rousey is not there the entire chapter, but that could be because he is not a real person, and so Queen isn't really interested in creating a dark world for him. However, I find it incredibly interesting that the Darkners in Castletown seem to acknowledge you as the soul. They know your name. Who told them your name? I'm gonna pick out a person who could have possibly done that. It's probably Rousey, because Rousey just does stuff and nobody talks about it, and it kind of bothers me. And this is a bit weird. They obviously know your name. There's a little theory I like that I was told from a friend. It seems that every chapter I'm gonna bring up a theory that a friend told me about. So I'm gonna ask another friend to tell me a theory about chapter 3. But this is interesting. We were talking specifically about Spamton, and we were talking specifically about how the Darkners seem to acknowledge the soul more than they acknowledge Chris. What my friend came up with eventually is the idea that they know, the Darkners, they know that you're controlling Chris, and they're either actively working against you, or they're working against Chris, or they're trying to manipulate us a dark path. The first one is that they could be working against us personally, but attempting to help Chris. We clearly know that there is stuff we do not see in this game. Chris hides things from us. It would not be hard to believe that Chris has been in Castletown when we were not there, or had done something, or Ralsei had done something in collaboration with Chris and let everybody else know that we are in control and Chris is not actually in control of their own actions. Somehow that may have happened. Again, in this chapter, we also get a moment, a segment, where we see through Ralsei's eyes, through Chris's eyes, Rousey asks Chris to close their eyes, and we see what goes on with Noelle and Susie. I find this incredibly interesting because, first of all, in this specific part, I'd like to mention it as well because I couldn't find a better part to mention this in. We sort of control Susie and we're given dialogue options. None of our dialogue options matter here. When we play as Chris, they matter to a certain extent. When we play as Susie, we cannot influence her. We try, we cannot. We as the soul, we cannot influence Susie because we do not control Susie. That means a lot because it shows something. An idea is planted into our heads that we could potentially control Susie. I do believe, I've said this before plenty of times, that we will control Susie towards the end of the game. I do believe that she will take the mantle of protagonist and the soul, not because she wants to, but because she will have to. I do not believe that this game continues for much longer without Susie and Chris having a moment where Susie and Chris finally have an argument or a clash, as so to speak. And I do believe when that happens, we will have to take control of Susie, and Susie will have to agree with us, and we'll have to work together. But here, I like this part. It shows that we do not have control over Susie. We have control over Chris, not of Susie. And of course, when it gets back to Rousey and Chris, Rousey is talking to Chris about something. Rousey is always talking to Chris about something. And this is what makes the theory actually make sense. The idea that Rousey and Chris set up these things when we do not see them and we do not hear them. They set up these plans, this acknowledgement, and have the like actual darkness fight against us. They act against us somehow, some way. These darkness are knowledgeable of who we are as the soul, and they know more than they're letting on, but we are not able to actually question them about it. For some reason, we're not allowed to question them about it. I understand that this is just a little game and you can't have dialogue options for each character. That's not what this game is. But I find it very interesting that the one character whose one line is, Somnus Town or Tremaine Town or John Town, whatever your name is, whatever the creator name is, it's that line and you cannot say anything about it and it just exists over there. That bothers me because what do you mean he knows my name? What do you mean he knows? What do you mean this is my town? What is this what is this plot of the darkness knowing who you are but doing nothing about it? What is this plot about Ralsei? It bothers me incredibly so. I mean, to a certain extent it makes sense. We control Chris and they clearly seem to have a goal to achieve. They wanted the shadow crystals, and judging from the end of the chapter, they want dark worlds. Chris wants something. Chris is looking and hunting for something in these chapters. Chris wants something, and they're working against us to a certain extent. And perhaps the darkness themselves are working against us. There is a idea that I kind of have where us fighting the Shadow Crystal bosses is not actually Chris and the gang fighting. At most, it's us and Susie. At least, it's just us fighting the bosses. They're testing us, I believe. I believe that the Shadow Crystal bosses are there to test us, to get us ready for a great challenge. If we defeat each Dark Shadow Crystal boss, I believe that something of importance will happen. I do not believe to a full extent that these Shadow Crystal bosses are genuine characters in the same way that King or Queen are. I believe to a certain extent these Shadow Crystal bosses are playing a part. They are playing a part set up by Chris and perhaps Rousey, and most importantly, mayhaps the voice that placed us in Chris's body at the start. Not the voice who helped us make a vessel, but the voice who placed us in Chris's body. I believe if we manage to understand what these Shadow Crystal bosses are trying to get us to do, what they're trying to teach us, what they're trying to test us with, I believe that may help us in understanding how this will all be relevant. The Shadow Crystals themselves and the Shadow Bosses, I believe that they have a common goal to help Chris in some way. But Chris does not need the Shadow Crystal. Well, they probably do for something, but Chris needs us to be strong. And for us to be strong, we need to take down these bosses. I believe that Chris is working together with the Shadow Crystal bosses, especially Spamton, and is working together with Rousey in order to make sure that we are fit for the task. For when that moment comes later on, when Chris needs to acknowledge whether we've done all of the shadow bosses and we're ready for a fight or not, that's when it will be important. I believe, this is my personal headcanon, that something will happen in chapter 7 when we face that voice at the start, the very first voice at the start of the game. We will come face to face with whoever that is, Gaster or otherwise, and in that moment, the game will have two choices, but only one will be available. As long as you've not beat all of the bosses, only one choice will be available. However, if you've beaten all of the Shadow Crystal bosses, you will have two choices available, and the second choice will be to fight. The first choice will be conformity. Chris will just go along because Chris does not trust us because we have not beaten all of the Shadow Crystal bosses. But if Chris trusts us, and if we have prevailed in every challenge up to now, up to when that moment will be, I believe Chris themselves will give us that option. Chris will give us the option to stand up to whoever is trying to play around with Dark Worlds and with the world. And I believe that itself will be how we achieve a different ending. Not through the weird route, not through whatever that is, what twisted fantasy that the soul, you as the player, may have to break the game and ruin these kids' lives. I do not believe that will get us a happy ending. I believe the way we get a happy ending is by being good friends with Chris. And I hope through everything that we do, it will allow us to have a happy ending, especially for Chris. I kind of got a little bit heated there. I I find it very interesting. But yeah, Castletown is great. It keeps changing every chapter, and you get more and more activities to do. And I think it's awesome. It is something I think a lot of games should have. It's a little area where you can just hang out. I like that idea. I like, in a similar way, Baldur's Gate 3 has a very similar idea with the campsite. You can just go to the campsites, you teleport there in a way, so they're walled off from the rest of the world, and you can do whatever you want. There's not a lot of activities in Baldur's Gate 3's camp, but well, the game is about fighting and having moments, so you can just go to camp and sit there with your friends, with your companions, and just, have a nice day. Similar in the Pathfinder games, you have Dresden, you have Oleg's Trading Post, you have your own capital, you have the Defender's Heart, and you can just hang out with your characters as much as you want. You can talk, you can banter, and it's sweet, it's nice. You will never be attacked in these areas. You'll never be attacked in Castletown, in the camp in Baldur's Gate, in the safe areas of Baldur's Gate 3. You'll never be attacked there. Sometimes there may be fights relating to the story or a quest, but generally just standing around is not gonna do anything to you, and I think that's what a lot of these games should have. A lot of these, RPGs or, story games, whatever you're playing, I think it's good to have a little area like this where you can just relax and hang out with characters. It's one of the things that I really love about Castletown, and the music is very beautiful. I forgot to mention this, but Castletown as a track is so beautiful. I usually have it on whenever I'm drawing because it is such a serenity. You can imagine the dark world sky, maybe filled with some stars above the castle town. And you can imagine like a sleepy, it's such a sleepy tune. You just feel comfort and peace when you listen to it. You can imagine the characters just maybe sleeping around the town, or just hanging out and having fun or enjoying. Dude, top 10 places to go to sleep to. Number 1, Castle Town. Number 2, Baldur's Gate 3, Act 3, Rivington Campsite. The little destroyed mansion where you sleep on the haystacks in the barn. Oh, I love that campsite. Number 3, um... I'm gonna put the Deadlock starting area in there, like the little Deadlock, like when you start up Deadlock and you can just hang out there. Yeah, like I'd put that little hotel room in there. It's really fire. Speaking about Deadlock, oh, we gotta make a video about that at some point. But Castletown as a whole is great. I kind of am sad to a certain extent that the music changes later in the game. But the Castletown music will always stay in my heart. The new song for Castletown is great, of course, but Castletown as a song, it will never change. My Castletown. Yeah. Anyways, having talked about Castletown, I really can't wait to get into the next part, which is two of, I believe, the most important characters in this game. Now that we've gone over most of chapter 2, including the two special characters, Queen and Spamton, and including Castletown, and including the Dark World itself, I really wanted to talk about two more characters. And the first one I figured I'd talk about is Berdly. I feel very bad for Berdly on a general level. I mean, Berdly is kind of disliked by the fan base for the simple fact that a lot of people find him annoying. A lot of people don't realize a few things, is that this is most likely like a 16-year-old. He's a kid, he doesn't know any better. And also, if anything, out of all of the teenagers in the game, realistically speaking, he probably never did anything wrong besides fight the fun gang under, well, I think the best way to put it is he was misguided in a lot of chapter 2. I believe that in chapter 2, in the Dark World, Berdly is antagonistic towards the fun gang and continuously fights Chris and gets in the way, not because he wants to or that he necessarily believes that they're bad people. I believe that Berdly is playing a role, and this is simply what he believes he has to do. We will talk about the way Noelle plays her role in the Dark World, but the two of them accommodate to the whole Dark World very differently. As I mentioned before, both Berdly and Noelle are not introduced to the Dark World the same way Chris and Susie are. They do not have a guide like Ralsei to explain to them every little bit about the Dark World and the way it works, the way you do battle, and the way you go around it and explore it. They do not understand the rules of the Dark Worlds. So we have to look at Berdly and Noelle's situation from an empathetic standpoint. You have to kind of try and imagine, what was it like when we first arrived in the Dark World and we didn't know what was going on. We were confused and we were just kind of going about things as we could. So when Noelle and Berdly show up in the Dark World, they simply have no idea what is going on around them, and they kind of have to decide what to do. Of course, they show up with these different outfits, with ordinary items that turn into weapons. They meet all kinds of strange characters, and suddenly you can kind of see why Berdly acts the way he does. He is the guardian, the hero. He is sort of a main character in his own way in his story. If Berdly was a playable character in Deltarune, I don't doubt that he would take the role of Susie or Chris as main protagonist, since he does that in Chapter 2. He plays the role of a main protagonist. If anything, if you decide against all other warnings to follow the forbidden path in Chapter 2, Berdly is a tragic hero. Berdly makes it out of the whole chapter a lot earlier than he does normally, as he plays a huge role within the entire chapter. He kind of plays a role akin to Lancer in Chapter 1, where he kind of gets in the way of the party. You fight him a few times, and by the end of the chapter, he helps you and you learn everything about him, which is great. He is very integral to the plot of Chapter 2, as I believe that if you didn't have Berdly there, half of the chapter would kind of just not exist. If you didn't have Berdly in Chapter 2, you would miss out on like 3 or 4 of the fights, and you would probably just go straight to the final Queen fight. Not to mention, you miss out on Berdly's general help and actual assist. He comes up with a plan to rescue Noelle, he rescues the party, and is able to build the giant mech suit to fight Mega Queen. I mean, but Berdly is incredibly useful and helpful as a person, yet Berdly is unfortunately disliked by a majority of the fan base. I think disliked or hated is not the correct way to say it, but Berdly is definitely like the character that a lot of people just used to make fun of. A lot of people make fun of Berdly, unfortunately, and he does sort of fit a stereotype at surface level, which, you know, to a certain extent, I think it's fine if you just make simple jokes or memes. Most of the memes you can see online about Berdly are like, he's the gamer, bro, and most of them are really funny, you know, they're very harmless. But I also believe there is a specific amount of people who go out of their way to actually hate on Berdly, and there's a certain amount of people who enjoy playing the weird route just because you sort of take Berdly out of the story prematurely. Although I will not lie, there does seem to be a chance that Berdly will return in the game, even in the weird route. Am I 100% certain it will happen? I'm not sure, but even weird route or not, frozen or not, I believe that Berdly is still yet to play a major role in the game that we have not seen yet. By the end of the chapter, and this is a big criticism I have about the chapter as a whole, is by the end of the chapter, everything is reduced to being a dream to Noelle and Berdly. That's what Susie and Ralse explained to them. I'm pretty sure, well, it's just Susie, but that's pretty much the explanation both of them get. It was a dream and nothing in it was real. At first, I always thought, oh, that's a bit stupid because these two characters developed a lot. And while they understand their failures and they understand their weaknesses, they were able to be vulnerable with those weaknesses to their friends, to Susie, Ralse, and Chris, and Queen to a certain extent. They were able to be vulnerable. However, the moment you turn all of that into a dream, to them it's like, oh, I never showed anybody this side of me. And for the most part, Berdly and Noelle kind of act the same as they did. I mean, the problem is we haven't really spent that much time with them after Chapter 2 to actually notice whether or not they've changed after the events of Chapter 2. I believe it would be important to note that there are certain scenes with Noelle after Chapter 2, specifically in Chapter 4, that sort of have her question things a little bit. But the thing is, Noelle herself is not that big of an issue, because I do not believe Noelle hides herself too much. If anything, she just becomes more comfortable around Susie, which is something that was already happening regardless of Chapter 2's Dark World. However, we don't see too much of Berdly, but it is heavily implied that in Chapter 5, which is the next chapter to release, and I do believe this to be in Chapter 5, is when we'll have the actual festival. And as we go through the game, we're constantly asked who we will take to the festival. Multiple times, we're given choices to favor certain characters over others, such as the gift scene in Chapter 2, and we are asked multiple times throughout the later chapters who we'd like to spend time with, who would like to go to the festival with, who we'd like to hang out with, and the Berdly is always an option. Now, do I believe that Berdly will continue to show up regardless of whether you take him to prom? Not to prom, to the festival? Yes, I do believe that he will still show up. He is an important character. I believe that Noelle and Berdly will be important characters in Chapter 5, as it seems from a lot of the theories that have some sort of evidence, it's that Berdly and Noelle will be important to Chapter 5 because the whole town will turn into a dark world, or at least the entire festival area will turn into a dark world, which means a lot of the Lightner characters may actually show up in a dark world. I do not believe this will be an isolated incident like the church or the closet or the computer room. I believe this time there will be a bunch of people in the dark world, and it will be up to the fun gang to actually help them get out. And who else to help them besides two people who are already experienced in the dark worlds? Berdly and Noelle. And speaking about Berdly, he also has to be very important to what comes next, because we're shown how Berdly goes against Chris. Ideas and theories that Chris was doing something shady, and even in the ending of Chapter 2, we have that proof. Chris opens a dark world. They open a dark world against all of the knowledge they have from Rouse, which again adds into my idea that Chris knows what's going to happen, knows what's going on, or at least they have an idea of where each dark world will be and the events of that day. Chris knows what's going on. But this is more important. Berdly actively opposes Chris in either route that you do in Chapter 2. Even if Chris even if you play the game normally in Chapter 2 and you do not attempt to be evil, regardless of that, Berdly will still stand against you, because I believe, in my opinion, that even if Berdly is playing the part, even if Berdly believes that he has to play this part of a hero, if he believes that this entire thing is a dream or some kind of roleplay or some kind of hallucination, whatever he believes that Chapter 2 is, and even if he's playing a role, even if he believes that he has to play a role to fit in with the others, which is something I believe in, I believe that he knows something about Chris, or that he is following the gut feeling, because it is to my own assumption that this game will not end without a fight against Chris. Who will we fight as is still a question left to be answered. I think the best candidates are, of course, Susie, Noelle, or Berdly, or, of course, the vessel from the start. That would be obviously very expected, but I do believe that we have not yet seen all of Berdly, and he has yet to play a very important role later on. There's something else I mentioned, which is the fact that Berdly plays a role in Chapter 2. I believe that Berdly has to play this role in his own mind. Because what we see of Berdly is this blue little bird, as described by himself even, who nobody ever really paid attention to until he won a spelling bee contest. And from there on, he had to maintain this level of prestige, this level of being smart. Like, he had to portray this appearance of a smart kid because to him, that's all he had, and nobody paid attention to him beforehand. It is very understandable for a kid his age to want to be this smart kid if it shows that people are interested in him. Because I believe to him, it looks like if I'm not smart, I will not have people who care about me. I will not have friends. And by the looks of it, unfortunately, Berdly doesn't seem to really have friends. Nobody really seems to hang out with Berdly besides Noelle, who mostly hangs around Berdly because they work on group projects together and do homework together, and Noelle helps Berdly be smart and present as a smart person, when in reality, all of the work that Berdly does is from Noelle. Noelle is the true smart person. She is the brains behind the operation, but she doesn't tell anybody. I'm not exactly sure why that is, but you know, as far as it goes, to Berdly, this is how you are valued in life. You have to be something exemplary. I believe that everybody knows how it feels when you're just kind of yourself, you're hanging out, and all of your friends seem to have a million things going on for them. I believe it's very easy to feel like you don't really add anything, or you feel like you don't mean a lot to the people around you because unlike them, perhaps you don't have a great job, or you're not as smart, or you don't have an amazing skill that you can talk about for hours, or you can show off or something like that. But I do believe that's how Birdleaf sees things. And I feel very bad for Berdly because it's very easy for a kid or even someone older to fall into that kind of trap where you believe that everybody's just better than you or cooler than you, and you're just kind of there and you feel a little bit like you don't matter. And so, whatever you have going on for you, if you have something, you feel like you have to cling to it. You feel like you have to keep that. The same way that Berdly feels like he has to keep up this smart persona, the same way he has to pretend that he knows all of these things and that he's smart and better than everybody. He believes that if he ever lets go of that, nobody will ever pay attention to him anymore. And it's very unfortunate because, to a certain extent, I believe Berdly has a point. Perhaps, however, it's better to just be yourself even if nobody pays attention to you. To claw and dig, to try and maintain this persona that people are interested in is terrible. On one hand, people will like you, people will be interested in talking to you, and people will always look towards you for stuff and be interested in you. The same way people are interested in Berdly because he's incredibly smart, or at least pretends to be. However, in my opinion, the best thing for Berdly to understand, which he does in chapter 2, is that he doesn't need all of these things to have friends. He has the fun gang, Susie, Chris, Rousey. They all admit that they would be Berdly's friend regardless if he was incredibly smart. And he agrees with it. He admits to this. Berdly stops this whole demeanor. And for the last quarter of chapter 2, Berdly is a fine character when he can drop this persona, this mask of having to be someone, of being scared that if you're not this person who people are used to, they will not care for you. He finally lets that mask drop, and suddenly we have no problem with Berdly. I mean, most of his antics stop, except for, well, this is also something I really wanted to talk about, which is the shipping and the fact that Berdly seems to have a romantical interest in almost every character, which I believe actually plays into something. We see in chapter 2 how Berdly thinks Noelle likes him and that he is yearned for, but he doesn't seem to really return that feeling until the end of the chapter. After Susie helps Noelle out of her room, Berdly shows up, Susie leaves, and Berdly tells Noelle that he has feelings for Susie. Now, this I find this very specific thing very interesting. We see throughout the entire Queen Mansion segment, especially the beginning, how Susie is actually nice to Berdly and is pretty supportive of him not acting like a smart jerk and just being himself. I believe that the reason Berdly likes Susie, and to an even more extent may like Noelle or any other character like Queen, is because Berdly mistakes friendship and generally just being nice with the need to be romantic. I understand these are teenagers, but I believe it is also very important to understand that idea because even older people than this fall into this kind of pitfall where you meet someone and they're really cool and they are interested in hanging out with you and being your friend, and you may mistake that action as, oh, do they like me? Because if you've never really interacted with people a lot, or you never really had people who were genuinely interested in just hanging out with you and being your friend, when you're not putting on a persona, where you're not being performative, when you don't have a social mask on, I believe that can easily be mistaken for, oh, this person may be interested in me. I should reciprocate. I should show that feeling back. And I believe that is where Berdly is wrong. Berdly is young, just like all the other characters, and has no idea how things work. But it is very clear he was mistreated by people in his life. And in my opinion, he is also possibly mistreated by his parents. Because if you do not receive love and care and interest and other things from your parents, you will seek that feeling of feeling accomplished, of being looked at by people. You will seek that in other people. That's why Susie, that's why Susie needs friends. That's why she puts on a mask. Susie needs friends. Susie needs people she can trust, because by the looks of it, she never got that from her parents. In the same way, Berdly needs to be told it's fine to just be yourself. You do not have to perform a certain way. You do not have to have a mask. You do not need to pretend you're smart. You can just be Berdly. Because for the fact, we like Berdly. Berdly by himself, when he is just Berdly, he is a perfectly fine character. He's pretty cool, smart, and he's a good teammate overall. But we don't get to see a lot of that Berdly because it only happens by the end of the chapter. And at the end of the chapter, they all think it was a dream. So Berdly just goes back to real life. Maybe he thinks about the events that happened in his dream. But because he has no idea that the real Susie and Chris knows those things, and Noelle to a certain extent, I mean, she knows as well, he has no idea that he was genuinely real with them. And the real Chris and Susie, they never said, oh, we like Berdly for Berdly. We like Berdly for being Berdly. They don't know that. Berdly doesn't know that, so why would he act differently? Because to him, it was all a dream, and nobody knows that, so he's just gonna keep acting the same, more or less. Which is very unfortunate in my opinion. I want Berdly to just be himself, to stop putting on this act. I do not like people who put on these elaborate acts, these masks, these personas, to try and act a certain way because they think people will like them that way, that people will be interested. People who are incredibly performative in the face of others, because if they are like that enough, perhaps people will show interest in them. I believe when you have friends, you're able to just kind of be chill around them. I believe when you have friends who are interested in talking to you, I believe at that point you can just relax around them. You can find comfort in their presence, and that's the most important thing. I don't talk a lot with my friends when it comes to actually talking to them. I text my friends a lot. I enjoy texting my friends, even though I feel like I kind of bother them. I enjoy texting them. However, when I talk to them, I simply enjoy being in their presence. And I speak whenever I feel like I have something to say, but generally, I'm just kind of fine being there and talking to them. And I think that's the important thing about friendships. That's the important thing that Berdly has to understand. And I hope that there will be a reveal later on where it's like everything in the dark world was real. All we felt was real. I don't want Berdly to go back to being his old self. I want Berdly to change and just realize around Chris and Susie and other people, he can just be himself. And he doesn't have to worry about anything. He doesn't have to be scared that because he's not putting on this persona, they're gonna stop talking to him and he's gonna be alone again. Because that's something you can fear when you've gone through stuff like Berdly has. When people only give you interest for a specific thing or for a thing you got going for you, it can become your entire personality. And I think you have to be careful around that. And you also have to be careful about the fact that sometimes you don't have a lot of friends, and when people show you interest, you should not immediately jump to the idea that it's romantical, since that's what I believe Berdly does. I do not believe Berdly has feelings for Susie. I believe Berdly may admire Susie. I believe Berdly may look up to Susie for certain reasons, and he may find it very comforting that she accepts him the way he is and that she wishes to be his friend. But I do not believe that Berdly actually likes her. He just confuses Susie's comfort and friendship for the idea that, oh, I've never been shown this kind of feeling, this kind of friendship, this kind of companionship before from a person, really. So it must be romantical. And it plays into this idea that he cannot just be friends with anybody. It always has to be romantic. It always has to be, like business. It always has to be something like that. The friendship has to have a meaning to people like Berdly, or else he's worried that they're not gonna be his friend. In my opinion, that's flawed because friendship can just be friendship. It's not a transaction. It's just people who are friends who can find comfort in each other's company. And I really hope by the end of the story, Berdly can find comfort in Susie and Chris's company. And Noelle as well. I've talked a lot about Berdly, and I love Berdly very much. It makes me very sad when I see people make fun of Berdly and just sort of, it's sad. But Berdly also has a large part of a very vocal audience who loves them, and I'm glad to see that. This is a Berdly safe space, and we will always talk about our King Berdly because he is on the right side of the Dark Worlds. And this game will not end. This game will not end without an awesome fight with Berdly present on our side this time. Anyways, next. Noel Holiday. Man, I have been waiting to talk about this character for a very long time, and Noel will come up most likely, I believe, in each chapter from now on. Because Noelle is probably the second most important character in this game. There's the most important character in the game, there's Noelle, and then there's Susie and Chris. And I think Susie and Chris can sort of spare a spot on that leaderboard. They can both be number 3. But Noelle is incredibly important. Not only because she is the key to breaking the game, and she can become the most powerful character possibly. We have not yet seen the full reaches of her ability, but we know in chapter 5 we will see more of what she can do. And while I don't want to see what she can do, I know that she can become stronger. I know that she can break the entire game. I know that she is the key to breaking free of the game's rules. And so, regardless of if you play the normal route or the other route, Noelle is yet to be important. Because there is one thing about Noelle. She has a sister, and her sister has gone missing. But I do not think I should talk about that just now. Noelle is a very sweet character, and she's a very cute little dear girl. She's very adorable. She probably has the most fan art out of all the Dark World Lighteners. Out of Chris, Susie, she probably has the most fan art available. She is incredibly cute. Everybody who draws Noelle, everybody who cosplays Noelle, it is always the cutest thing you have ever seen. Noelle is just an amazing character in my opinion. Her Dark World design is probably one of my favorite things. The way it just looks like she has a simple like little cloth on her. She has like the little thing like hoodie hood behind her, and it's so cute to me. It literally looks like she is just wearing a robe. And I think that plays a role into certain things. The character's design is very important in this game. You have Chris, who looks like a knight. They look like the embodiment of a main character, a knight in armor, somewhat simple, but with a pink cape. The pink means something in Chris. I do not believe what. Since Chris is mostly blue and like this very dark blue, almost like a gray, dark gray on their armor, but it is mostly blue character with a very pink, somewhat like red pink magenta colored cape. Then you have Susie, who is mostly purple and pink. You could say to a certain extent that Chris's pink cape is sort of signifying Susie in a way, but I believe there's actually more to that, and I'd like to talk about that in a second. There's also Rousey, who wears a robe and a hat and has a very bright pink scarf, who could also be a connection to Chris. They have similarly colored scarves, and I believe there is some meaning there. However, that's not what I want to talk about just yet. There is Berdly, who is very similarly dressed to Chris, but has a more futuristic look. I believe the reason that Berdly looks this way, he looks very futuristic, is because he first ever entered in the cyber world. I believe that if the Fun Gang's first Dark World was actually the cyber world, they would have had different outfits. As we see throughout the game, starting from chapter 2 and onwards, different acts are related to different outfits. We have the Take Care and the Hospitality outfits, in which case our characters change outfits, they change robes. As we continue, they change outfits again. There are a lot of outfits in chapter 3 that the party can wear. I believe they all signify a different Dark World, and in my opinion, Berdly looks the way he does because he started in the cyber world. If our characters, Susie and Chris, started in the cyber world, I believe they would have looked similarly to Berdly to a certain extent. I would have really liked the idea that each Dark World changes our designs of the characters a little bit. Not by a lot. Maybe give Chris one of those eye sensors that Berdly has, or maybe give Susie some kind of enhanced jacket or a futuristic looking jacket. Perhaps give Rousey something else. I think that would have been cool. I think that would have looked cool. I think it would have been interesting, but at the same time, changing the designs of the characters for each chapter can be difficult. I can assume it can be a lot of work, and it doesn't need to exist. We get the idea, and at the end of the day, the sprites are just that. They allow us to come up with ideas, they allow us to come up with drawings and the fan art to actually create something. Noelle probably has the most simple design out of everybody. She has a white robe on with a hood, seemingly, which will come into play in chapter 3. When I talk about chapter 3, remember that Noelle's robe has a hood. It is very clearly visible that she has a hood. That is very important. I think that's very important to keep in mind. Everybody probably knows about this, but I need to talk about this when I get to chapter 3. It is so important that I talk about this in chapter 3. She has that hood, and I believe it looks very cute. First of all, that's kind of what I wanted to say. The hood looks incredibly cute on her. Like, it's oversized. It's too big for her. I love Noelle so much. She is such a cute honey gravy pie. She is the cutest character in Deltarune, in my opinion. And it does help that she's an actual lightener. She's not like Lancer or Rousey, who are cute, however they're darkeners. We don't know what a darkener is. We don't know how old they are. We know that Noelle is like a 16-year-old. She's a sweet little kid. And there's innocence. There's a lot of innocence. But with Noelle, there's also a lot of drama. You would not think that much of Noelle if you just interacted with her in chapter 1 and 2 before the dark. Noelle comes off as a very preppy student, in my opinion, a very preppy person. But we see signs. We visit her father in the hospital, as I mentioned in the chapter 1 video. We visit Rudy, and it doesn't seem that he's doing too well. And Noelle and her father played this game together, Dragon Blazers, and she doesn't want to keep playing until her father is back home, and she gets really scared when he hints at the fact he may not be coming home to finish the game, and that she should bring the game there. She gets visibly scared about that. I mean, this is a girl whose dad is in hospital, and she seems to have a really good connection with her dad. I mean, if her dad and her weren't close, she probably wouldn't feel so bad about this, but it's very clear that they close. They play games together, and they both go to church together, as we see later on in the later chapters. They try and spend a lot of time together. We don't hear a lot about Noelle's mom. I believe there's a reason for that. Just the same way that Noelle seems to be the main interest of Queen in chapter 2, I believe that reflects something. Noelle is not really cared for by her mother, by the looks of it. We don't hear about Noelle's mother, and we don't see her. I believe that is due to the fact that, well, she doesn't really have a lot of interest in Noelle. And if you don't like a certain parent, or you don't get along with them, you obviously don't really talk about them. So why would she bring up her mother if the two of them don't really have a connection? I think that's really important to know. And when her father is in the hospital, and her father doesn't seem to be doing well, I think it's very easy to see why she might be scared and why she might be going through things. Because if her mother isn't there for her, and her father might be in danger, who's she gonna be left with? She must be scared. Because besides her mother and besides her dad, there is one more person that Noelle doesn't have. And there is one more person that Noelle doesn't have to take care of her in case things go bad. And it's her sister, December this holiday, the older sister of Noelle, who used to dry up her tears when she was scared, who used to take care of her when she was in danger. December holiday, the girl that went missing. Every other character in Deltarune has something going on. Chris is missing their brother Asriel, and their family appears to be divorced, more or less, their parents. Susie seems to just kind of be alone and scared to open up to anybody, and doesn't seem to have anybody taking care of her. Berdly, as we've discussed, has been putting on a mask just to try and get people to be interested in his presence, to be his friend. He is incredibly misguided by that. And finally, we have Noelle, who is probably the character who has the worst going for her. Despite being the top of her class, and despite appearing very well adjusted and acting very nicely towards everybody, she's got a lot on her plate. As I mentioned, with her parents and the lack of connection between her and her mom, the dangers of her father not being there eventually, there's one more very important thing. She used to have a sister who was always there for her, who promised to take her to see a city, to go on trips with her, to see the world. She was promised those things. She was promised that she would always have a sister to take care of her, an older sister to look after her. And one day, that sister, that person who always took care of her, who always looked out after her, went missing. I believe that December was not just the cooler older sister to Noelle. By the fact that Noelle doesn't talk about her mother, and by the fact that we can assume Noelle doesn't have a great relationship with her mother, we can assume two things. Before Des went missing, things were fine at home. And when December went missing, everything started to go wrong. I believe that is partly why we don't see Noelle's mother. Yet we know that Noelle has a mom, as Rudy talks about her, and we do not find a grave of Noelle's mother. We can assume here in chapter 2 that Noelle has a mom, but she doesn't talk about her a lot, and she doesn't show up. I believe that December's disappearance has caused a rift in the family, and I do not believe it is only the Holiday family that suffered. I believe it is also the Dreamer family. As we know very well, the Dreamers and the Holidays were very close. Something happened. Something we do not know, yet it is incredibly implied that that something has something to do with December Holiday's disappearance. If there is one character in this game that holds the most amount of importance, that I believe will be the key to finding out what happens at the end of the game, I believe December Holiday is the key to the entire game, and it only makes sense that the second most important character in the game is her sister. I said in the first video that our role as the soul is to protect the kids from harm and to guide them on their adventures. I believe that the second voice that placed us in Chris's body, that ripped us away from the first voice, who could be Gaster, who could be anybody, I believe that second voice wants us to find someone, and I believe that person is none other than December Holiday. I believe our role in this entire game is not to go on an incredible adventure. It is not to become stronger. It is not to go on a weird route and break the limits of the game and destroy the lives of these precious innocent kids. I believe our role is to find this lost girl, because it is becoming increasingly more important chapter by chapter, and I attempt to speak in these videos only about what is relevant at the current chapter. But as we continue on in the game, this character, this December, this missing girl, this lost girl, becomes more and more mentioned. She is haunting the narrative. We do not know if December is still alive. We do not know what happened to her. We can only hope. But I do believe that our role here as the soul is to get to the bottom of this. And I believe the reason we were put in Chris's body is for none other reason than the fact that Chris and December knew each other. We know from Noelle's dialogue in chapter 2 that her and Chris were close as kids. Well, they're still kids, but I guess when they were younger, they were very close because their families were close. The holidays and the dreamers. December is a holiday. She's the older sister of Noelle, and as Noelle mentions, they used to go on adventures together. They used to look through the forest. I believe that Chris was selected specifically for the fact that they are able to somehow find December. Even if Chris does not know what happened to December, even if Chris doesn't know where December is, they are Chris, and they may have a very strong bond from when they were younger with December before she went missing. I believe that Chris is very integral to the story. Not to be a hero, not to be a savior, but I believe Chris's role is to find this missing girl. I believe that's why we are, as the soul, are brought here. To find this lost girl. And that is why I believe that Noelle will also be important to the story. Way more than she will ever be important to the weird route. Where she is able to, again, I have to mention this. Noelle is incredibly powerful. Her powers are incredible. Because we as the soul manipulate. That is why I feel incredibly bad for Noelle. It's because in the weird route, she is manipulated. She is used as a pawn. It was not enough to have Chris as a willing vessel, somewhat willing vessel. As in the weird route, we begin to slowly manipulate and take control of Noelle, forcing her actions, forcing her to do magic that she would otherwise not want to. While I only prefer to play the normal route and I do not ever want to touch the weird route, it is important because this is an ability the soul has. This is an ability we have. This is a path we can choose to go down where we ruin, for the lack of a better word, we ruin this innocent angel of a girl. We ruin her life. We ruin Chris's life as they are forced to do these actions that we force them to do on their friend. These terrible things. And we force them to coerce and manipulate and to use their friend as a weapon. And while you can argue if you just do the normal game, this should not matter. But it matters to an extent because it shows that Noelle is important. It shows that she can be used as a weapon. And if we choose not to do that, that is great. I do not believe we should ever do the weird route because it is terrible. I do not believe in my heart that the weird route will lead to anything good. But I believe that Noelle is the key to finding December, to finding the lost girl. I believe she will be the key in the end because she is incredibly powerful. She has a lot of power in her. I do not exactly understand how the power in the dark world works. However, I do believe it is somewhat linked to someone's trauma, someone's pain, someone's suffering. I do believe that power is directly correlated to the way someone feels. As we know, this game is heavily set on emotions. It is heavily set on escapism, on not thinking of things. We know that Noelle likes to spend a lot of her time online. From the Spamton sweepstakes, which is a thing I don't want to tread too much because, as we know, Toby Fox mentioned that stuff that isn't directly in the game is not really ever canon. Anything that is outside of the game will never really be referenced that much. But we know that Noelle plays video games and spends her time online. We know these things, and I believe she searches for her sister. She looks for her sister. She tries to find her sister, but I believe she is having a hard time. December holiday. All I can say about December holiday right now has been said. These are my personal theories as of chapter 2. There are more theories about December holiday and a lot more to say about her, but she will have her own section later on. But I believe it is very important to discuss Noelle. These two sisters are linked to each other, whether we like it or not. December going missing is incredibly important. The same way that Chris is missing their brother Asriel, Noelle is missing her sister. However, the circumstances are very different. Chris's parents are divorced, but Asriel is not missing. He is gone to college. December is missing. Noelle doesn't know if December is okay or not, or if something's happened to her, who knows? And so, these circumstances are very different, but they mirror each other. Two families who used to be best friends are now more or less broken on both sides, and the kids have to suffer for it, which is terrible. But I believe that Noelle will continue to be important to the game. As we see in the other chapters following this, she consistently has importance to the plot. Even if Berdly doesn't show up that much in the later chapters, Noelle continues to be important. She continues to be present because she has that key, and she is the key. And if she is the key to breaking the game, to becoming powerful, to go against the laws of the world which the game set for you, I believe she is powerful enough to lead us to a good ending. I believe that if Noelle has this power, I believe she is the key to a good ending in Deltarune. But for that ending to happen, we have to find December. And while I can't talk about December too much now, because I'd like to give her own part, Noelle and December are so important to the story, and we have never even seen December. We do not know what she looks like, but we can assume that she looks somewhat similar to Noelle. I think at the end of the day, Noelle, Berdly, Chris, Susie, they're all sad characters. They're all just a bunch of kids who have very crappy lives, to be fair. They really seem to have a hard time just kind of going on about their days, and it's really sad to see, because I think a lot of people can relate. A lot of people can relate to Noelle. A lot of people can relate to most of the kids. And that's why I think as a community, we gravitate towards the Lightners. We gravitate towards Susie, Chris, Berdly, and Noelle more than we really do towards Lancer or Ralsei. Lancer or Ralsei may be nice to look at. They're cute little characters. They're cute designs. They have funny lines, but they don't have the same amount of character as a Lightner does. We do not know how old Lancer and Ralsei are. We do not know about their trauma. I mean, they do have a little bit of trauma. Lancer clearly has problems with his dad. Somewhat of a characterization. But compare Lancer and Ralsei and how much you can say about them to any of the Lightners. Even Chris. You can say so much about Chris. You can speak about them. I can speak about Chris, my sweet monarch, for hours if I wanted to. I could talk about how that scarf on Chris's shoulder may just be a remnant of something December had. I believe that scar is something December gave to them, and Chris wears it with them everywhere they go in the dark world, because perhaps that day they will find December. I believe all of the characters are in some way linked, but importantly, Noelle and Chris and December are incredibly linked together. But I believe besides everything, Chris and December are incredibly linked together, because there is something there. There is something that we are not told, and I believe perhaps this is just from all the fan arts and the fan comics of Chris hanging out with Des, since she was the cooler older sister. Perhaps that's just me being like a theory head and pulling stuff out of my mouth, which is most of the stuff in this video, most of the stuff when you watch a theory video, so I think I can allow myself to say it. But all of these kids have stuff going on, and they all have a hard time, and you can say so much about them, because I believe in having a diversity in life, and in being a person, and despite all the adversity you say, if you still try and do stuff, you still try and be a person, that is these children. For their age, which I assume to be 16, maybe a bit younger, they are incredibly powerful. Not in a video game sense, but the fact they're still able to go on at a young age. And I think a lot of us are like them, or at least were. I still have to struggle to wake up every day because life can be incredibly difficult. Especially like Noelle, when maybe you don't have anyone to really support you at the moment. You can have a hard time like Chris, where you're awkward and weird and you don't know how to fit in. You may think you're weird, but you're just being yourself, and there is nothing wrong with that. You may be like Berdly, and you may believe that to have friends in life, you need to give them something. You need to be someone. You need to have this personality, this mask, this persona. You may think you need that, but you don't. You don't need to claw at the wall to have friends. You can just be yourself, and maybe you're gonna struggle and you're not gonna have friends for a long time, but people will be friends with you when they realize that you're just yourself. You're not just the smart kid. You may be like Susie, and you may have gone from home to home, adopted, and you may have gone from school to school, kicked out constantly. You may have dropped out. You may have tried year again and again to repeat your last year. You may have done all of those things. I have done all of those things. I relate a little bit to each character, as a matter of fact. I believe a lot of people do. I believe a lot of people relate to each character. I believe they relate to the struggles they face. And I think that's the importance of Deltarune. Deltarune is a story about facing your worst trauma and escaping that trauma, and realizing escapism is okay. Realizing that at times it's fine to take a break and just not have to put up with stuff. It's fine to be sad and to struggle, but you have to realize that there are things in life, just like the characters realize. There is things to laugh about. There is friends to have. And as long as you have a few people who can support you, I think that's the most important thing. Susie and Chris and Noelle and Berdly, they all have a terrible time, but they have each other as friends. And Susie never really seems to mind too much. We know that she probably has a terrible time at home. She's had a terrible time in her life, to the point where she puts on this very scary persona, this mask, just like Berdly does, but it's different because she's not trying to be scary. She just doesn't want to hurt herself. She doesn't want to be in danger. She doesn't want other people to make fun of her, so she puts up this very dangerous, guarded stance in front of people, and she scares them off because she herself is scared. All of these characters fear something, and most of the time that fear is being themselves, because we see Susie be incredibly cheery once she goes from chapter 1 to chapter 2. The more we spend time with Susie, the nicer she is, the more protective she is over her friends. That's incredibly important. We see her let her guard down, which makes me incredibly sad that one day something will happen and she will realize that Rousey and Chris are not telling her everything that they know. And that will be a terrible time when that happens, and I hope Susie will have someone to rely on. Hopefully Noelle or Berdly or Lancer. Every character struggles with stuff in this game. Noelle struggles with a lot. And it's harder for us to see what Susie and Chris suffer, since
we don't know much about Susie's home situation, and with Chris, they cannot tell us. They cannot verbalize what is going on. But we can infer. And we can see a trend in each character. That being that they're all more or less mistreated by adults. Some more than others. And evidence of this is very clear from Chris's perspective and from the way the game uses Queen as a parent figure to Noelle and Berdly and Susie to a certain extent. But also, as we continue the chapters, it will become more and more evident that there are not a lot of great parents in Hometown. But Rudy seems like a nice guy. I'll give him a pass. Mostly because he's in hospital. For reasons we do not know, but I believe it is important to keep that in mind. Rudy is in hospital, and while not in this video, that will come up again for a reason you can probably already guess, but I'll leave that for next time. I think I have spoken enough about Noelle and the other kids in general to kind of get my point across. These characters matter a lot to me because I can see myself in each one, and I think they can show you something. Playing this game is not about playing a game. It's about realizing that everybody goes through stuff, and we have to escape that stuff sometimes. It will be a very weird jump to go into the next part of the video from this, but I think I got all of my emotions out, at least for the time being. I don't want to start crying, but when I was talking about December, it was really hard. I was kind of debating talking about her in this video. I'm glad I did. I think for now I've talked about her enough. But anyway, now we kind of have to finish off the video at some point, so we're gonna move on to the next 2 bits of the video, and then hopefully it will be over. This will not be a very long part, but I think it is incredibly important to address it. The gameplay you see in the background is not mine. I've asked a friend to play the weird route for me, and so I'm using their footage. They've asked to remain anonymous, and that's fine, but just know I did not play this because me personally, I cannot bring myself to actually play the weird route. I don't want to talk about anything in specific about the weird route, anything that happens. We all know the weird route, and there is no need for me to go into detail, but there is something I want to talk about it. I did consider making a hometown segment as I did in the previous video, but I would just be rehashing most of my statements. I believe that this was much more suiting for this chapter. The weird route, I do not believe will result in a good finale. I do not believe it will take us to a good ending. What I believe the weird route will do is give us a different ending. A lot of people assume that the weird route will not actually give us a separate ending because it has been stated that this game will only have one ending. In any other time, this would make sense, but in Deltarune specifically, the weird route breaks the game. It breaks the rules of the game. We as the soul actually begin to have influence over the characters. Later on, the weird route becomes a little bit more cryptic, but it does seem like when we play the weird route, we begin to break the game. We begin to shape the world as we see fit, and the world has to play by our rules. Now, there's one thing to say about the weird route is that it is most likely intended to be played after you finish the game, after you see the ending. Whether it will result in a better ending, I'm not sure. I think it will result in a different ending. Whether it's good or bad, I'm not sure. But I believe we cannot predict what the weird route will do, except for a few things. Because we do not yet know the end of the game, and we were only meant to figure out the weird route, I believe, from chapter 3. Because in chapter 3, we have the sword route, and we have everything in that route connected to the secret boss. In that route, we find out how to begin the weird route in chapter 2, where the sword route itself is not actually part of the weird route. It does have certain differences if you're also doing the weird route and doing the sword route. However, it is very clear that it is meant to be something that we find out about later on in the game, and I believe it is meant to be done only after we know everything that happens in the game and can go back and start a fresh playthrough after having seen the end. I do not believe it's a good idea to be playing the weird route as chapters come out. While it's understandable, I believe it may result in something bad. What I mean by this is that in Undertale, we have a very clear meta understanding of saves and deleting save files. What I mean by this is that playing Undertale and having multiple save files is actually recorded by the game. And the characters, certain characters, express knowledge that you saved, or that you saved, deleted that save file, and then started a new playthrough with different choices. Certain characters will comment on that. Certain characters know what you've done. What I mean by this, what I'm trying to say, is that I believe the weird route will have a similar effect. Doing the weird route, even if the game is not over yet, doing the weird route as the game comes out, I believe will result in changes that we may not want for the main plotline. The main normal route will be influenced by the weird route. I have a belief, very interesting theory. I believe that at some point in the weird route, we will merge with our main save file. That is why it is important that we complete the game first on the normal route and then we play the weird route. I believe in some way Chris and the Soul and Noelle, after having acquired enough power, will actually transfer over to the normal route save file. I believe that the point of the weird route is to make Noelle stronger, not because we want to kill anyone in the normal route specifically, like Berdly or Susie, or injure them or whatever. I believe we are making Noelle stronger to fight somebody at the end of the game, where in the normal route, we are not able to defeat that person, but if we go and do the weird route, whether good or bad, we will end up transferring our save file into the main save file, in which we will bring Susie, in which we will bring Noelle, and Chris into the main save file. Now, this is a very big crackpot theory, and it's more of a fun idea for what the weird route could be, because we cannot guess a lot of things. A lot of people guess that there will be fights with Susie, there will be fights against Rousey. That may happen, but I believe that you have to look at the weird route from a very out of the box way. It will result in a different ending. Of course it will. We're breaking the game. We're breaking out of the game. So when thinking about the weird route, we have to break out of our mind. We have to break out of this preconceived notion that the game will stay the same. We are not playing the rules of the game anymore. We're playing by our rules. We're breaking the game, which means we're not playing by the rules of the game anymore. Nothing said about the game in the normal route or by any developer is relevant because we're breaking their game. And that's why I believe the weird route, it cannot be predicted by anybody, because it will be something that will use anything in the game to mess with us. I believe that there may be some crazy stuff down the line in the weird route, not actually done by the characters, but how the game treats it. It is not out of the realm of possibility that we may transfer to different save files. I do not believe it is out of the realm of possibility to believe that we may actually escape the game itself. Perhaps, and this is crazy, perhaps somehow we could travel to Undertale through the weird route. It's crazy stuff, but I'm just saying this as examples. I do not want to travel to Undertale. I want Undertale to have nothing to do with this beautiful, beautiful game, Deltarune. I understand that Undertale is great. I want these two games to be their own thing, but it is an idea. I do not believe that. I believe that people are focusing on the wrong things when talking about the weird route. We're focusing too much on what happens to the characters, which is, in all regards, it is terrible. What happens to Noelle, Berdly, Chris, it is terrible. It is terrible. Regardless of how you view it, it is terrible. But I believe that the weird route itself will result into something much greater that we may have never seen in a game before. The way that we break the game has to be talked about more. It is very scary to think about what may happen to the characters themselves, but I do not believe that it will be a good or bad ending. I believe it will be a separate ending, but something here doesn't strike me as this will result in an evil ending. Our actions are evil, yet I do not believe that they will result in a necessarily evil ending, and that's why I bring in the merging of the save files. I believe the ending of the weird route will be an addition on top of the main game's ending, on top of the normal route's ending. The weird route is not meant to be played by itself. It's a counterpart to the normal save file. So most people, when they play Deltarune, they do their normal save file, and then they play the chapter. Like, let's say when chapter 5 comes out, people are gonna do chapter 5 normally, and then they're gonna do chapter 5 with a weird route. It's a companion save file, and we need to understand that, because as much as I hate it, I think it will result into something extraordinary. All the evil that we do in the weird route, it is evil, it is disgusting, but I believe even then it may lead to something never before seen in these kinds of games, in any, fantasy adventure game. Will it be resulting in us meeting Gaster? I do not believe so. I believe Gaster will make an appearance regardless, because I want Gaster to make an appearance, in all honesty. But when it comes to the rear route, we do not know anything about it. But what we can guess is not how it will go in terms of the characters or a storytelling perspective. I believe what we have to focus on is how can we break the game further? How can we influence the world further? The game has 3 save files. You have a pacifist playthrough, you have a playthrough where you fight everybody, and you have a weird route playthrough. That sounds normal. I believe that the weird route may result in a save file appearing in the save file screen. The Chris save file we see at the start, I believe the end of the weird route will end with us receiving that save file and being able to play it. And what that will mean is perhaps a flashback or a flash forward or something where we play as Chris, but we do not actually play as the soul. We just watch Chris do stuff or some other version of that. What I'm trying to get to is I believe the weird route is connected to the Chris save file we see at the start. And also, I believe save files are very important, and I believe the third save slot will be something related to the weird route, because I do not believe people go out of their way to do both pacifist and, I guess, neutral or bad runs. I don't think most people really bother doing the bad run, but I guess if you want to play the game like that, I mean, at a certain point, I'd even say you may as well just do the weird route instead, because why would you do the bad route? You get like nothing out of the game doing the bad route besides the experience in the chapters, and beating everybody up in the chapters really results in a lackluster experience. It was the same kind of thing in Undertale, where if you fought everybody, if you did the genocide run, it was very boring. It resulted in a lot of grinding. It resulted in a lot of just sitting there. You didn't get to interact with the characters as much. Most characters you don't actually get to interact with, and it doesn't even have a proper ending. You just kind of get to the throne room, and it's like, oh, you kill Asgore, and then Chara takes over, and it's like I never really cared for the genocide route. I never the pacifist route, amazing. But this is kind of what I mean. What I'm trying to say is, when it comes to the weird route, save files are incredibly important, and that's kind of what I want to leave it off as. The weird route, as much as I hate it, and as much as I talk against it, it is incredibly important, and I believe we should pay attention in the future how the game in the weird route, how the game acts about itself. We see in chapter 4, while I will not show footage of this, we see in chapter 4 that by that point, as the soul, we gain the ability to move through text boxes. That's all I want to say about the chapter 4 weird route. But we gain the ability to move through text boxes. That's incredible. And that's what I mean. We need to see what sort of similar things to this happens in chapter 5. Because I believe it will have something to do with us taking control over the save files in some way while playing the game. But that's just what I kind of wanted to say. I really debated doing this part, but I was like, oh, do I want to do a hometown segment again? I don't really have that much to say about the chapter 2 hometown, and so I thought it was only fitting having to talk about the weird route. Once again, at the end of a video, I'm really glad I was able to get this out. This chapter was this whole video, I guess, is representative of chapter 2, as the chapter 1 video was representative of chapter 1. It was my first video, and it was very janky, and you can kind of tell at certain points I was a bit lazy. You can kind of tell that here again. There are certain points where I don't know what I could put on the screen, since, I talked for like 30 minutes, and there isn't really 30 minutes of footage about the Berdly, unfortunately, in chapter 2. But, I'm glad I got to make the second video, and I am planning to make the third chapter video, which I'm not sure how long that will be, seeing how long this video is. I'm a bit intimidated by the length, but I think I can do it. However, the chapter 3 video will not be the next video I make. I'd like to gain a little bit more experience and have a little bit more time to work on the chapter 3 video, as this one will take a while. And I'd like to not go straight into another Deltarune video. So, the next videos coming out will be relating to Final Fantasy 15, where I'd like to go over each chapter of the game independently. However, those videos will be much shorter, I assume. I really don't know, since each chapter is like, if you look only at like the stuff in it, I guess it's not that long, but at the same time, each video could take longer. But yes, there will be Final Fantasy 15 videos, and I aim to also talk about Fallout New Vegas at some point, as well as a few other games. I generally just want to talk about games that really make me click. And eventually, yes, I will make videos about Baldur's Gate and the Pathfinder games, respectively. And yeah, I have a lot of ideas. I can't wait to get started. But Deltarune Chapter 3, it will be a while. So for the meantime, this is what we have so far. I may make a few separate Deltarune videos to talk about certain topics, but I want to hold off on talking about things like design or the characters' relationships with each other until we get to chapter 4. I believe at that point there is much more you can talk about.
You can also notice I missed out on talking about the rooms in Castletown, since I believe it is better to just talk about them later on, since in chapter 2 we do not yet see Rousey's room, so that's kind of why I want to hold off on it, since when we get to chapter 4, we're gonna have to bring this up again, and I kind of want to try and hit all the topics I want in specific videos. As a result of that, I will not give the Weird Route its own segment in the following chapters, however, it will continue to be brought up. Anyways, as always, there is a Discord link in the description. If anyone would like to be a part of my Discord server, you don't have to be a Deltarune fan or a fan of any of the games I talk about. I guess as long as you like my videos, that's cool. So, yeah, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it if you got to this point. It's really cool of you. While making this video, I felt very bad at times. I struggled to get through some points and wondered if I should do it, but now that I'm actually at the end of it, I feel very proud of myself, and I feel really good that I managed to get here and work on it and put it all together. So, thank you very much. Join the Discord if you want. You're very welcome, and have a good day.